Hello, my fabulous families and kiddos. This video is somewhat of a twofold, therefore it is intended for both the parents and students to watch. Today we're going to learn about why objects sink and float. But before I do that, I just wanted to take the time to thank you parents for your participation in your child's learning thus far in the school year. As always, if you have any questions or need to contact me for any reason, you can access me through our Balloons app or by email, and I will get back to you within 24 hours as promised. Today, your kiddos participated in an exciting experiment where they learned about why items sink and float. They also learned about 4 factors that contribute to why an item will sink and why an item will float. Kiddos, can you share with your family members what you learned in class today? We interact with objects every day that when placed in water or another liquid substance will sink or float. As adults, we use our background knowledge and make predictions about if an item will sink or float. This is what your kiddos were able to do today at the end of the lesson. Today, I'm going to give you, yes you, the parents, some homework to do with your children. But before you can do this homework, I want to teach you a little bit about why objects sink and float. I also want to teach you about the vocabulary we use in class to tell why, so that you are using this vocabulary with your child as you do your activities or homework that I'll explain later on in this video. So let's get started. Just as I did with your children today, I'm going to have you make some predictions as to why objects sink and float. Please access a pencil or pen and paper to record your predictions and to check to see how accurate you are at the end of this video. Now that you've made your predictions, I'm going to have you watch a BrainPop Junior video to introduce sink and float concepts. Please watch this full video so you learn about why objects sink and float.
Ships ahoy, matey! Oh no, our ship was supposed to float, not sink. I'm not really sure. What sinks and what floats? When something floats, it stays up by itself. The bottle, seagull, and seaweed all float on top of the water. When something sinks, it falls to the bottom. Look, the bubbles of air float, but the treasure chest, gold, and jewelry all sink. They can't stay up on their own. All that stuff seems pretty heavy. Maybe heavy things sink and lighter things float. You're right, Moby. The ship is really big and heavy, and it still floats. So, what makes things float? Looking at all this water sure is making me thirsty. Thanks. How about some ice? The ice cubes are floating. And look, the liquid started here, but then rose to here after you added the ice. The ice cubes make the water go up. Let's try something else. The coin sank, and it made the water go up a little. I bet an object can sink if it weighs more than the water it pushes away. And an object can float if it weighs less than the water it pushes away. Right, Moby. Our ship floats because it weighs less than the water it pushes away. But weight and size aren't the only things that decide if something floats. How does shape help things float? Let's make some boats that can float this time. Good idea, Moby. We can use clay. Mine floats, but yours sinks. My canoe is hollow. The air inside helps it float. Your boat is a solid block. Nice boat, Moby. What are you making now, Moby? The Titanic? I hope there aren't any icebergs in that water.
Now that you've heard why objects sink and float in kid-friendly language, let's go over the definitions of sink and float and the 4 factors that contribute to whether or not an object sinks or floats. Looking at the charts below, you can see that when an object sinks, it means that it falls to the bottom underwater. This means that the object was heavier than the water it was pushing away. You can see the boat in this photo sank because it is underwater. Looking at the float chart, you can see that when an object floats, it stays by itself on top of water. This means that the object was lighter than the water it was pushing away. You can see that the boat in this photo floated because it sits on top of the water. To further instruct our kiddos on what makes an object sink or float, we talked about these 4 factors: weight, size, shape, and air inside an object. When you do your activities with your children, make sure you're asking them what factors they use to make their predictions. Now let's get to the part that explains your homework. It's really important to do these activities with your child so they deepen their knowledge on why some things float and why things sink. In the following slides, I'm going to explain 3 activities that you can do with your child. The first activity is called Let's Talk. I encourage you to do this with your children as it requires you to talk with your children. As you go throughout your child's morning or bedtime routine, use the words sink, float, and factors as many times as you can this week. Say things like, I wonder if the soap will float in the tub. What does the size, weight, shape, and amount of air inside of the toy tell you about whether or not it will sink or float? The next activity is called Explore in the Tub. This activity requires you to engage in learning experience with your child during bath time. This activity requires a little more planning and a few more materials that were not needed in the first one. During bath time, provide plastic containers and cups, combs, blocks, metal spoons, and sponges for your child to explore with and see if the objects sink or float. Guess with your child which shapes and materials will sink or float before you drop them into the water. Try dropping a cup that's empty and then fill it with water to see what happens. The last activity is called Learning in the Kitchen. This last activity requires you to interact with your child in the kitchen. While you're preparing a meal, give your child a bowl to help you wash fruits, apples, oranges, lemons, or limes. Ask your child to make a hypothesis or a prediction and say which ones will sink and which ones will float. Investigate by placing them in the water. Now parents, this next part is for the kiddos, but I encourage you to listen in because they may have questions. Now that you know why items sink and float, you can help them with their homework that is due tomorrow. It requires a little bit of research, which you might be able to help with. Students, please get out the homework sheet that I gave you at the end of class today. I want you to be able to look at it while I explain my directions. As you can see, there are 5 spots, more than 5 spots, for the items that you choose. You only need to pick 4 items from around your house to see if it will sink or float. But there's a catch. One of the items must be big enough that you couldn't actually put it in water. You could choose something like a car or an airplane, but be creative. To fill out your worksheet, first I would like you to write what the item is or draw it. Then, using your super smart prediction skills, I want you to predict if the item will sink or float. Put an S if you think the item will sink and put an F if you think the item will float. Do this for all 4 items. Parents, this is where you come in. It is time for your child to do their experiment with the 3 testable items once they have filled out their prediction sheet. Please give them a bowl and fill it halfway with water and have the 3 items your child wants to test nearby. Students, like we practiced in class today, carefully put each item in your bowl of water and put an S if your object sank or an F if your object floated in your results box. Once you get to the item that you can't actually place in water, ask your parent or caregiver for help to look up if the object will sink or float. Discuss with your family member why you think you were right or wrong, using the 4 factors that were discussed in class today. Make sure you put your chart in your backpacks and bring them to class tomorrow. We are going to make a list of everyone's results. Parents, I hope you learned a little bit from this video and now know the specific words to use when your child interacts with objects that are sinking and floating. I'm interested to see your child's responses to each activity. Remember, I only ask that you do one, but the more the better. Feel free to post any videos of your children's responses to our Blooms website. I've made a post for you to comment on that says sink or float. I love seeing the learning that takes place in your homes. Have a great day and let me know if you need anything at all. Thanks for listening in, kiddos. I can't wait to see your smiling faces tomorrow.